We've spent a lot of time talking about the big needs for the Vikings, but what about those sneaky little needs that they're going to have to deal with in free agency as well? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. I appreciate my hashtag everydayers so very much. You guys make the world go round. Thank you a lot for hanging with me in this offseason period as well. Tomorrow, we're going to have 4-0 Friday again. If you've been enjoying those, and the feedback has been really positive on those, which I'm very glad, because that gives me all the more reason to continue doing it. And the goal is just about every Friday up until the draft to talk to Tyler, or at least somebody with the draft if we can't figure out the scheduling. So that's something to get excited about as well. As for today's show, I want to talk about some sneaky little needs, the little guys. This is the Johnny Muntz. This is that tier of guy. And we will talk about some tight end threes later in the show. But while most of the resources will be pointed at corner, at safety, at D-line on the interior of the D-line, those big positions. And of course, whatever they do at quarterback will be a big thing on that. I should mention, and maybe this should be the leader of the show, Kevin O'Connell had another quote that was even more direct about what he was going to say about Sam Darnold. And he was like, yeah, we look forward to seeing how free agency goes for him. Let me find the exact quote here. I think it's going to be really exciting. We'll see how the free agency process works out for Sam. Okay, so he's gone. We've had quite a few indicators to that are indirect. That's the most direct one so far, worth mentioning, but it doesn't change anything that we've been talking about on the show for the last couple of weeks. But obviously those will be huge. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other little things around the margins, little tertiary jobs that the Vikings need someone to do that they either haven't had a guy to do and have suffered for it, or they're losing the guy that does that job. You think punt gunners and stuff like that, although hopefully they get Najee Thompson back. He's a punt gunner, but they're losing Trent Sherfield, bringing him back as a punt gunner, or somebody is going to have to be something that they actually think about when they do this. And I want to start with wide receiver positions, wide receiver 3. And I'm not even call it wide receiver 3 because that guy still might end up being Jalen Naylor. He certainly has that job going into camp, and whoever they bring in, and unless they reunite with Stephon Diggs or something completely insane like that, which, you know what? I'm not going to rule it out. This is a very Kwesi move to get the over 30 injured guy that was really good before. That's a thing. But assuming they don't do something super big like that, I'm talking about a gadget guy. I don't need him to be the third receiver on the team, but when's the last time the Vikings had, that bubble screen and he can make it work kind of dude? Just get the ball in his hands because he's just so gosh darn talented, but he doesn't know how to run a route, so he's cheap. That's the kind of guy I'm looking for. And unfortunately, in the free agency market, those types of dudes are kind of few and far between. If you want a burner, you got a million guys you can go for. Or if you want, a 30-something, established name, this is actually kind of a wild free agency class for that. You've got Stephon Diggs at 32. You've got Keenan Allen at 33. You got Amari Cooper at 31. DeAndre Hopkins at 33. Mike Williams at 31. Brandon Cooks at 32. How many Pro Bowls did I just name? Demarcus Robinson at 31 is not in the same tier as those other guys, but it's actually an idea I kind of like for the Vikings, if only because of the KOC familiarity, but also there's quite a bit of scheme fit there. And maybe the craziest one is Cooper Kupp. So Cooper Kupp is going to be traded by the Los Angeles Rams. Obviously, there is a lot of immediately people think, oh, he's just going to go reunite with Kevin O'Connell. Kevin O'Connell's had all kinds of amazing things to say about Cooper Kupp over the years. It's very clear that O'Connell has a lot of respect for that guy, and it could just be a, hey, bring me my guy kind of thing. The Vikings have done that at a smaller scale a whole bunch. Cam Akers, Johnny Munt, Austin Schlottman. Like, there's been a bunch of those guys. God, who is the linebacker? Troy Reeder? Was that the guy? And he didn't make the team, but he was like part of the 2021 Super Bowl run, and Kevin O'Connell really liked him. And it was just a disaster. So I'm getting sidetracked. Cooper Kupp would probably be the craziest thing. And so the Cooper Kupp situation is the Rams are willing to take money on, and they don't really want a draft pick. Like, they understand that, like, they're not really asking for a huge draft pick. I think they just, for whatever reason, this thing isn't working out for them anymore. And so he's actually going to be kind of cheap. What that probably tells you is that this dude ain't good anymore. So be aware of that. And my evidence for that is very indirect. It's the fact that if his team, that he used to be the face, like he was on billboards in LA. And if they're willing to just like dump him for nothing just to get rid of him, obviously that's not a great sign. But also just the way that his 2024 season went, a little bit injured, a little bit losing his job to Puka Nacua, and then suddenly his production kind of dried up, and he's getting older. A lot of injuries have piled up on him over the years. You can kind of put together a narrative, and that's just a narrative. Like, there's every world where Cooper Kupp comes to Minnesota and figures out whatever problem he was having in Los Angeles, that, you know, whatever wasn't working out for him works out here, and, you know, familiarity with the scheme. So he takes to everything right away, and he still becomes a productive, like, member of society here. But I wouldn't expect a 1,000-yard season or anything like that, right? Like, he would be coming here to be a depth receiver. He's not really the kind of guy I'm talking about, though, you know? Like, the Vikings have a lot of guys that can go downfield and run a dig and, you know, catch a ball over the middle and turn upfield. I'm talking about, like, you know what's a weird one? Braxton Berrios. He's kind of a dude on the Dolphins, but like half of his yards come after the catch every year. And he's been that kind of guy. Now he's 30, right? Like, this is not, we're looking for, like, I'm looking for like Diami Browns, you know, like guys that you can give a bubble screen to and something might happen there. And it's not a great year to want that guy. And I don't think the Vikings are particularly that into that guy. By the way, just look at the free agent list. Dan Chisena, fantastic. Oh no, he's an RFA for the Panthers. They'll probably keep him. But like, it's a year for, if you want like an established and reliable possession receiver, but not necessarily a great year for the gadget receiver. So you're going to have to turn to the draft. This might actually be a place to do it, because there's a few like small school guys. There's a guy, Jamal Pritchett, out of South Alabama, 8.3 yards per catch, or yards after the catch per reception. You know, there's a guy from Miami of Ohio, Cade McDonald, Isaiah Page from Old Dominion, right? Like, the smaller school guys that are yak guys, like that might fall and be one of those like day 3 available things that the Vikings could potentially look at, depending on how like draft day trading and stuff goes. If they end up with a 7th round pick somehow and they just want to like throw it at that, I think that could be a nice allocation of resources. That's not something I'm going to look very deeply into, except for the guy that the Vikings end up drafting. I'll watch him, but that's kind of the only way I'll watch one of these guys, because I'm focused more on the bigger needs right now. But we're taking a little bit of an aside to talk about those sneaky needs. So I don't know, Cooper Kupp or just be a downfield team again. Not so bad of a fate, but it would be nice to have something that really forces those corners to be disciplined and to watch something on the outside. If you have like a guy that that can punish you for backpedaling and for playing super soft and like, you know, capping things over the top, it can have the effect on the outside that like a really strong and scary running game will have on a linebacker, and the way that they like robot, you know, that like classic play action idea. That kind of stuff can happen on the outside, but it's for, you know, oh man, we got Percy Harvin out there and I really need to make sure that I tackle that dude. And then suddenly, you know, you bite up on something and you get smoked by Bernard Berrien over the top. There's a flashback for you. Let's move to elsewhere on these sneaky needs here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by TurboTax. It's tax season, and that used to mean waiting and wondering and worrying if you were ever going to get any money back, or worrying that you did something wrong and you were going to get in trouble, and then waiting for those answers and wondering more. But now, taxes means matching with a TurboTax expert who can just do everything for you as soon as you want. An expert who will give you your taxes their undivided attention and get everything right, giving you real-time updates on their progress while they find every deduction possible, file all the forms, all the investments, doing everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now that is taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at turbotax.com/guarantees. Moving right along here with the Locked On Vikings podcast. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. The next kind of sneaky, weird need I want to talk about is actually one that we discussed on Forno Friday not long ago, which is edge. I'm talking about like an O-line, the outside linebacker. This is Pat Jones' replacement. And like Tyler said on that show, Pat Jones and Jihad Ward, those guys, almost combined for like 1,000 snaps this year. All of those guys did. And by the end of the season, when Dallas Turner was a clear part of that picture as well, you would get like significant run for all 5 of those guys all game long. And I think it played to the benefit of the Vikings quite a bit. Everyone was fresh. That was a lot of different skill sets, a lot of different challenges for linemen. And they had a much better time getting pressure until everything fell apart at the end, where I think if you like the worst games that they had on getting pressure were the ones where Grenard and Van Ginkel played the whole game. Like Dallas Turner barely got in the playoff game and they couldn't get pressure, but they could get pressure when everybody rotated. I don't know why they moved away from that. And I think the same thing happened against the Lions and Rams too. Dallas might have been hurt for one of those, or maybe it was earlier in the season, but either way, this defense must rotate D-line. It just has to. And I think maybe just being in the playoffs, they got a little bit, well, let's not put our, we're not doing developmental reps for the young guy in the playoffs, but it's like, yeah, but it helps. It helps guys stay fresh, like there's a reason to do it. That's not just getting some tread on the tires of your young dude. And so I do think it's crucial that they get a guy that's going to be the 4th and 5th dude in the room. This is replacing Jihad Ward and bringing back Jihad Ward and just having him be the guy. Honestly, all right, sure. Like that totally works for me. But like he played 41% of snaps in 2024. You got to replace those. And a higher role for Dallas Turner will replace some of those, I would guess. But I still like guys that can possibly be, a 10 play a game kind of dude and like bring you those disruptions. There are some names that I think fit the Vikings that are really interesting. There's one that keeps jumping out at me, and that's Dante Fowler Jr. He's had a long career in a lot of different places, doing a lot of different things. And he's not a guy that I would expect the world from, but he is somebody that I think can, get to you off the edge, can drop back into coverage about as much as Grenard does, and, play that weird one. I don't mind the idea of like, I'm looking at the 30 somethings that, you're not going to ask to change the face of your defense, but to just get in there and not screw up a little bit so you can spell guys. So I'm looking at like LJ Collier is an interesting idea to me. We actually had a lot of suggestions about Emmanuel Ogbah in the past before he returned to the Dolphins. I remember a lot of talk about, I think there was like somebody trying to trade for him or something like that. Cause he's a Flores guy. That is a name to watch. Perhaps he's 32 now. So he probably comes cheap. Flores familiarity, if he still likes playing for that guy. If you really want to go crazy, Josh Sweat is out on the market, but I don't think so. This is not like you're not looking for a guy to fill a hole. You're just looking for a guy that can exist for a little while and not be a total screw up. and the impact that has in terms of freshness is not something we need to really talk about any more than we already have. But, look, if you spend all your money on, I'm just going to throw out a name, don't get mad at me, but BJ Hill, I just really like BJ Hill. But if you throw all your money out on BJ Hill, one of these rando guys like Michael Hecht, like, could end up being that like first free agent signing, and we go, what? And we haven't seen the big one yet, and we go, that's it? Come on. And it's like the first hour of tampering, and we're going crazy. But these are the kinds of guys that are going to like fill out free agency. While we're at it, let me circle back around to the Johnny Munt memorial replacement role. I think there's a lot of guys that can do this. You're just looking for someone who can block okay and pass catch okay. You're not looking for anybody specialized. So I don't like the idea of like Michael Pruitt, who's 33 now, by the way. He has carved out a very long career for himself after being drafted by the Vikings. But, I'm not looking for Mike Gesicki, right? Mike Gesicki can't block. This is not the job for you. If you want a big, slow wide receiver, go get Mike Gesicki. This is not what I'm asking for. I am asking for somebody who's got a little bit more of a versatile skill set. And I must admit that I'm not too familiar with the like specific ins and outs of everybody's tight ends. I'm looking at like Josiah DeGuara, who's wrong in the other way, where he is, to me, seems like more of a blocker than a pass catcher, where, the Jaguars kind of their tight end production went elsewhere. I always liked CJ Uzomah, but I might just be overreacting to the one time he was most visible to me, which was the Bengals Super Bowl year. So maybe there's something like that. But just looking at the rest of this list, I think bringing back Johnny Munt's actually a pretty good idea. But there's a lot of like, hey, you just need to be okay. There's a lot of names that'll be totally fine like that. Noelle Cox, bring back Gronklin, Tyler Conklin, reunion, somebody like Pharaoh Brown. I think he's an okay blocker, but correct me if I'm wrong. Harrison Bryant. Like, there's a lot of dudes out there that could fill that role, be the third guy. And, to be honest, this is either Johnny Munt or someone you like haven't heard of. So it's not something to sweat, but I do think, but like, it's going to have to be somebody. There will be a name that I'm going to come on and be like, and then the Vikings signed this guy. It'll probably end up being a footnote in that episode because it'll be, in the middle of the free agency flurry where way more stuff is happening. But it'll be a name, and it's worth kind of getting to know the options out there a little bit. You know what? Nick Van Ette. No. Never mind. Not Nick Van Ette. Next up, we're going to talk about maybe the sneakiest need on the Vikings that nobody's really talking about, but everybody acknowledges, and that's the fill-in OT for Christian Darrisaw. That's an important one, and one that might actually end up draining some resources. That'll be next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off, you're still going to get the same lines more or less, just as a live bet, and it's the same odds and same thing. Or you can kind of like wait till halftime, feel out the game, see if there's going to be a big comeback, or you can smash a whole bunch of things together into a big old same game parlay, do something ridiculous. I know you all like to do that. FanDuel's live betting feature is a great and fun way for me to stay into a game, especially if it's like, oh, someone's up by 30. Well, now the spread is 33.5, and you can still have some kind of skin in the game and something that'll kind of keep it fun if the game isn't doing that for you. Plus, the app is super easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. So right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Moving right along with the Locked On Vikings podcast, we're looking at free agency needs, kind of the sneaky ones, right? You don't want to spend a first rounder on this. You don't want to spend a big contract on your tight end 3, but it's got to be somebody. And in the same way, we need I'll call it the Cam Robinson replacement. It should not be Cam Robinson. Cam Robinson was not a scheme fit for the Vikings. And is very specifically the angle at which he sets up his hips in his pass protection does not gel with the way everybody else on the Vikings do. That is okay. that was okay for the time, right? Because he was at least a functional tackle, and beggars can't be choosers when your guy goes down in the middle of the season. They did what they could. I think the idea of trading for Cam Robinson was an incredibly clutch way to paper that thing over, and it didn't really start biting him until like the last couple weeks of the season. But that is not somebody that I think you bring back to continue that role. Now with a whole offseason to deal with it, and the possibility of worst case scenario, Christian Darrisaw missing like half of the next year, it's still very much a position you're going to want to take seriously. This is not something you throw a 6th rounder at. This is not something you just look at Walter Rouse and say, yeah, we're good with him. And unless he has shown you something that I'm not familiar with, you got to get somebody real. But I don't think you can do that. Like, I don't think you can be like cute about this. I don't think you can be precious about this. Some people said like Patrick McCarry, and then you're going to move him into guard after. I don't want to mess with that. Okay. I just give me a regular guy. And actually, we talked about this on Minnesota Football Party, and Sam Ekstrom had an idea that I've really come to love, which is Cornelius Lucas. Played fine for the Commanders. He's 34. When you're 34, you're signing 1-year deals, right? When you're Jedrick Wills and you're coming off your rookie deal, you want a commitment. You want to know where the rest of your career is going to be. When you're 34, this might be it. And you're not really expecting to get an offer of more than a 1-year deal from anybody else. So sure, a 1-year deal, and I get to have like a fast track to starting for a couple more games, and then I get to spend the rest of the year like chilling as a backup. Yeah, sign up Cornelius Lucas for like veterans love that kind of thing. And unless he wants like a true starting job for the whole year, I would fully understand that as well. But like, that's just feels like such a market improvement on like David Quessenberry, that it feels like it's worth going out and, spending a few $1 million, not 14 million, but like 4, 5, getting that thing papered over so that there's no pressure to, rush Christian Darrisaw back. There's no, and then you're not putting, a bad 2nd-year tackle. Like right now it would be Walter Rouse if they don't do anything about this. That with a rookie that's trying to develop and a problem that big on his blind side for the first few games could be detrimental in a way that lasts. You don't want to mess with that. Other names around here, there are some real funny ones out there. Like, we could Oli Udo this if you want. We could Storm Norton this if you want to get real funny about it. But I think it's probably best. There's also like Andres Pete. I would hate that idea. That's not a starting player. Like Cornelius Lucas was a starting player, and you need to at least rise to that threshold. And there's an interesting, as we kind of get to the end here, there is, I think, an interesting balance in free agency between finding value and settling for dudes who suck. And it's super easy to be like, yeah, but he's cheap, for a guy that like ultimately will not make your team, right? Like Troy Reader. Oh, what a value signing. He didn't make the team. That's just the name in my head right now, even though that was a couple years ago. But there's always those kinds of dudes. Oh, actually, a really funny one, I'm looking at this list, would be Dan Skipper. That would be a hilarious one. And that's the Vikings are just stacking different kinds of toxicity on that line. You might as well collect them all like they're Pokemon. But anyways, the balance is like, you have to just like find the threshold that you're okay with, right? Ideal world, you can go get a bunch of cheap free agents that are all really good. But like that doesn't happen, right? So if we're looking at positions that we cannot allocate a ton of money to because they just don't rise to the same level of priority as corner and safety and, guard and like the ones that we all are running back, the ones that we all are talking about all the time. And you just can't stick with that. You have to find your line, right? You have to just like set your standard and say, I'm not willing to go below Cornelius Lucas at this job, right? I'm not willing to just like have a backup be the backup as though this happened in the middle of the season. If it happens in the middle of the season, you might be a little more okay with that, or something scrambly. That's Cam Robinson, who's a player who can play, but not necessarily the best scheme fit. And so you're going to deal with some problems, but it's better than if the guy just like outwardly sucks. So for me, you find that line and it gets a lot easier to kind of weed out the dudes that like the Andres Peets that are just a bad idea, even though the value there would probably be fine. He probably would be cheaper than a backup tackle, and you'd be fine with him as a backup tackle, but I don't want him in the game a lot. I'm probably rambling about this, but I'll leave you with this, and that is, again, the reassurance that free agency week, which starts March 12th, like between the 12th and the 19th, is going to be a whirlwind. The Vikings have a lot of money and a lot of things to do. They don't have a ton of flexibility because they have such a long shopping list. They have to do a lot of things, but the more variables you have in that free agency, the more you can afford to kind of mess around with that allocation to find a value play. Put it this way. Let's say that there's a pool of 5 free agents that you like at each of these positions, and one of those free agents is the perfect value guy. Well, if you only have one need, you got a 1 in 5 chance of finding your value guy. But for each new need that you have a new chance to find your value guy. And it gets a little bit easier to say, well, that's our favorite value guy in the class, but if he doesn't like fit a need that we have, we're going to let somebody else get that value thing. And that's a bummer. It allows you to sort of be targeted about that. The problem is you also are exposing yourself to risks by the same logic, because for every value guy that you really like, every Van Ginkel, there's also a Marcus Davenport that's not going to work out for reasons that, you're going to take those risks finding those value guys. If I say, man, I like Cornelius Lucas, he's 35 and he falls off an age cliff and he sucks total like horse butt all the way up until Christian Darrisaw is back, and that doesn't work, well, you have to risk that. You just have to take that risk. The guys that don't come with risk are more expensive, and then that becomes the risk in and of itself. So that risk management for these sneaky needs is kind of, it's why they're low octane. Like if tight end 3 sucks, oh well, right? If you don't have a good gadget receiver again, well, that's not the biggest thing in the world. We like Naylor. Like it has to be, I think that's why I'm a little bit more nervous about the tackle position and treating it like one of these tertiary needs where whatever happens, because that could ruin games for the Vikings. It could ruin a bunch of games for the Vikings until Darrisaw is healthy, and we don't know when that's going to be. So you expose yourself to the world where, oh my God, we have 8 games of this hell, and yeah, we get out of it, but we could have spent $2 more million and helped that. Like, yeah, to me, that seems worth it. Anyways, I'll be back tomorrow with 4-0 Fridays, and as always, Skol.